Okay, so the copperhead. Copperheads do not produce a lot of young. They're going to average about 6 young per year. Now, ovoviviparous means that they keep the eggs inside of them. All right, they do not lay eggs. They have the eggs inside. When they have their babies, they hatch and are born at the same time. Okay, so typically it's 6. They could have up to almost 20 young at one time, but it's usually around 6. Not a lot of young. Some of these snakes will breed in the spring. Sometimes they have a second breeding season in the fall, but then they keep the eggs. The female doesn't fertilize the eggs until it gets to the next spring, and then she'll fertilize them, and then they hatch. Now, another really amazing thing, so ovoviviparous is pretty cool. With most snakes, once they lay the eggs, that's it. Or once the eggs hatch, in the case of an ovoviviparous snake, that's it. The parents don't have anything to do with them. With copperheads, sometimes some of the young will stick around for a week or so until their first shed. So that's pretty awesome that the young will actually stick around with the mom for a little while. The dad has nothing to do with it. He's off already. But the young may stick around with the mom. Now, in Connecticut, we've got 14 different kinds of snakes. And one guaranteed way that you can tell a venomous snake from a non-venomous. So most people, if you see the triangular shaped head, that's a good sign that it's venomous, but we do have some snakes that get a triangular shaped head without being venomous. They have a thicker body. Again, there are some non-venomous snakes that get that thick body. But if they have a cat-like pupil, a slitted pupil in their eye, not a round pupil, then that, at least in Connecticut, in the state of Connecticut, and I believe anywhere in New England, that rule works. Once you leave New England, that rule is out the window. So here in Connecticut, if they have a slitted pupil. Now I'm going to say right now, that's not a great way to tell the difference, because if you're close enough to be looking at the pupil of that snake's eye, you are too close to the copperhead. Okay? We really need to give copperheads distance. We are not a prey item for any of the snakes in Connecticut. The snake is not going to bite us because it's angry at us. They're only going to bite if they're scared. So if you approach them and get too close, then they're going to get scared and they're probably going to strike at you. Okay? The copperheads, they are a venomous snake, but most of the time when they're biting somebody to scare them away, so it's a fear bite instead of a prey bite, they're not going to inject venom. About 80% of the time when they're biting to scare you away, they're not injecting their venom. The venom is for food, and they're smart enough to know that that's a food item versus scaring you away, so they're not going to inject the venom if they're just trying to scare you away. In Connecticut, most of the people that are bit by copperheads or any of the venomous snakes, most of them, there's only really 2 ways it happens. Either you don't see the snake and you step too close to it, or you see the snake and you poke it or prod it, and then I kind of feel like you're asking to get bit at that point. So please don't do that. Someone's mentioning social distance. That's a really good point. Copperheads get up to about 3 feet for the big ones. So you want to keep at least 2 copperheads distance between you and other people. But for a copperhead, you want to keep at least 2/3 of the body length away is typically how far they can strike. If they're coiled up, about 2/3 of their body length. So this guy's about a foot and a half or so. 2 to maybe 2.5 feet. Probably not quite 2.5 feet. But so I want to keep, a foot and a half away from the biting end of the snake. Most of the time they don't lunge or launch. This one actually launches, where it'll launch its whole body. So we need to be more cautious with with this particular copperhead than most of the copperheads. I've had a few copperheads over the years. Now this copperhead came to us through a study that was being done. This is really amazing. Another really fascinating thing about copperheads, there are a few vertebrates in the world that have asexual reproduction. So it has happened that female copperheads in captivity can reproduce. Absolutely amazing, fascinating. This one's a male, so he got taken for the study. It turns out he was a male. They weren't using males for the study, so then we ended up with him. But it's really amazing. This is one of the few animals that can actually reproduce without having a male. So that's really an amazing thing that they do. Now, their toxin, we talked a little bit about the toxin. First of all, when they're injecting their prey, so they have, their main prey are going to be rodents. That's the main thing that they're going to be eating. Their fangs fold up into their mouth. So they have two hollow fangs. When the mouth is closed, they fold. They're hinged. They fold up. When they open their mouth, they automatically come out. The fangs are hollow, so it's like getting an injection at the hospital. When the medicine passes through the needle into you, the same thing happens with the copperhead's fangs. The venom passes through the fangs into the prey item. So really, really amazing that they have that ability to hinge those teeth up and down. Now they have a hemolytic toxin, which means it attacks the muscle tissues and the cell walls. So it's basically when they bite you, the area around your bite becomes like a giant bruise. So you want to be really careful about that. Most copperheads are not, it's not considered deadly venomous for people most of the time. If you have a prior condition, you know, there are always circumstances where it may be deadly to a person, but in any case, you want to go to the hospital because it can do permanent damage to you. So if it bites you in the arm, that hemolytic effect is going to break down all the muscle tissues and could cause permanent damage, and you may lose function in your hand. So you want to go to the hospital and get that anti-venom. The anti-venom for a copperhead is different than that of the rattlesnake. So we have two venomous snakes in Connecticut, and they have different anti-venoms, but you're going to need to go and get an anti-venom. Younger snakes tend to inject more venom. So the immature snakes, they don't control the venom as much, and they tend to inject venom more often. So it's probably closer to 60 to 70% of the time they're actually injecting venom into you. All right. Now they can live about 20 years in the wild, longer in captivity. I think the longest I found one in captivity was almost 40. So you almost double the age in captivity versus in the wild. And that's due to consistent temperatures, constant food, vet care if they need them. Yes, even a copperhead is taken to the vet if it needs it. Fortunately, this copperhead has not needed a lot of medical care. So we're pleased about that. Someone's asking, why is it so active? So this is not the cage that it's usually in. We actually have a larger tank that can be padlocked. So this tank is not padlocked. This is just for you to have a better view of the snake. So that would make it active because I moved it over to this. And also yesterday it ate. And it ate quite a bit. It ate 3 mice yesterday. So that makes it a little active as well. It's probably looking for more mice right now. Sometimes 3 mice would be enough. Sometimes they could eat more mice than that. So let's talk a little bit more about the venom, and then we'll talk about what they do in the winter. So they are pit vipers. What that means is they have little holes behind the nostrils. So just behind the nostril is a pit or a hole, and that allows them to sense heat. They have a heat sensing organ in there. They can discriminate between the warm body of a mouse and the cold of a rock or gravel or bushes or things like that. That gives them a more accurate strike during the nighttime when they're primarily hunting. During the summer, that's when they're going to be hunting. There are pit vipers around the world that can actually track down after the venomous snake bites its prey. For our venomous snakes, they release it and they back away. They let the mouse go off and die on its own. And that's a really good strategy for a snake, because a rodent that's dying, it could bite or scratch and cause damage to the snake. So the snake just injects the venom, lets the mouse go off and die, and then it can track it down and eat them at a later time. I see a really awesome question. Somebody says, what's its predator? So the copperheads do have a few predators. There are some birds of prey that will eat them. The red-tailed hawk and the great horned owl will eat them. They are not immune to the venom. The venom, if the snake bites them, it could still affect them. So they have to be very careful. Usually the birds of prey swoop down and grab them. There aren't a lot of mammals that go for them, but there are other snakes that will eat copperheads, including the milk snake and some other snakes that will occasionally eat a venomous snake. So I love that question. Keep your questions coming. You can also put up where you're from. I'm noticing a lot of people are already doing that, so I appreciate that. Another question was, how many times per year do they shed? So in general, most of the snakes of Connecticut shed about 3 to 4 times a year. Older snakes, it's a bit less often, and younger snakes can be a bit more. The copperheads tend to shed within a week or two of being hatched or born, so they shed very quickly once they when they're young. Somebody says, we have some mice in the barn, come and get them. The snakes love barns because of that reason. They're loaded with mice. Now, the snakes, I said that they're only active up until the fall, so usually into October. From April to October is typically when you're going to see a copperhead being active. We've had a particularly cold May, so I'm going to say a lot of them are probably, if they did come out when it was warmer, are probably back down in their dens to stay warm. They do go into holes and cavities to spend the winter, and then they're going to come out and be active. They have really adapted to a New England environment. So in the summertime, when it's really hot during the day, they're going to be active at night. In the spring and the fall, they're going to be active during the day, and then just find a quiet place to go in the evening and overnight. I see another question, what do baby copperheads eat? The babies have to eat very small things, so it's usually insects, worms, things like that, spiders, and they're going to gradually work their way up. So a baby copperhead is only going to be 2 to 3 inches long, so you can imagine they need very small prey items to go for. All right, he just flinched at me when I moved. All right, do we have any other questions? I want you to take a close look at the copperhead because they do get confused for other snakes. Sometimes a hognose or a milk snake will be confused for a copperhead. The copperhead doesn't really have any black on it. It gets these dark coppery parts of the stripe, but it's still a copper color, no black. And the light copper goes against dark copper. The other snakes will have a black stripe or some other color. Copperheads are all coppery, either really dark copper or light copper, but always a coppery color. The bellies are lighter. I'm not going to lift him up and show his belly. Actually, I might use the tong. I use tongs to move him around, so I'll show you the tongs that we use. This is how we move the snake around. I do not want to give him the opportunity to bite me, so we just use the tongs. And he's kept in, like I said, a padlocked tank. So in a padlock, with the padlock, I'm the only one that has the key because I don't want anyone else to be bitten by a copperhead. Now I mentioned that he ate 3 mice yesterday. So snakes will go in waves. In the winter, we don't hibernate him because he still has to do programs, but he will eat less often in the winter. That's just a natural thing that the snakes do. Then in the summertime, they get more active and they eat more. So he's just coming into his really like he's eating phase, because 2 weeks ago he ate 3 mice, then he ate 3 mice yesterday, and he's acting like he's still hungry. So I'm probably going to try another mouse probably tomorrow. I'm going to let him rest today because I've handled him and wound him up a little bit. You can see him sticking his tongue out. So even though they're a pit viper and they can distinguish temperatures, they can also use their tongues to smell. They will wave their tongue around, collect the particles, scent particles that are in the air, will stick to the tongue, and then they have the Jacobson's organ on the roof of their mouth. If you want to see our other snake episodes, we have a few other snakes that we've done. Go to megspointnaturecenter.org, the virtual learning center, and you can see the other ones. And I talk more about how snakes smell. Again, they also don't have external ears, so they feel. There's a bone attached to the back of their jaw by cartilage that vibrates, and that's what tells them what they're hearing. So they're actually feeling noise rather than hearing it. Ball python doesn't eat at all during the winter. Yep, that's common. Again, the ball python, even though the temperature in their enclosure stays the same all year, and we do adjust it down just a tad for the evenings, but they know either the length of day or just their internal clock tells them that it's winter and they eat less. So I always find that interesting that they're in the tank, they're inside. How do they know that they should be eating less in the winter? But they do. Now, typically a copperhead, the tail changes color at the very end. Some people say it's a lure. They wiggle it around to attract a mouse or something. I don't know. I've never seen a copperhead doing that, so I'd really like to see that confirmed. But the end of the tail does change color. And he's not really showing you the end of his tail, but it's much, much darker. When they're babies, the tail can actually be lighter than the rest of their body. Do we have any other questions? I recommended snake discovery. Someone's asking, is it on YouTube? The Megs Point Nature Center YouTube channel does also have all of these programs archived, so you'll get to see all the programs up there. Now, you can continue to post questions. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about what we're doing. We have these programs every day, well, Tuesday through Friday at 11 and 2 each day, so tune in and you can watch them live. Someone's saying the coloring is really awesome. This snake, actually, when he sheds, is even more brilliant. The color stands out even more, so really, really cool. Someone's talking about the snakes wiggling their tails. So all snakes, when they get nervous, their tails twitch. Even our rat snake, our milk snake, they all do it. That's why a rattlesnake rattle is a warning, because they do it when they are nervous. So that tail will wiggle, but I don't know that they're using as a lure. Do copperheads in warmer climates eat less in the winter months or cooler times of year? So great question. You guys are really on with the questions today. They will. When the temperature drops down, they will eat less. But if you're down south, they have a longer summer season, so they do eat more and they can get a little bit larger down there. So they have a longer growing season. Do they like humid or dry climates? So copperheads are found all over the Northeast, except for Florida. For some reason, there's a section, the lower part of Florida, they're not in. They're in the Panhandle, but not the lower arm of Florida. So they all of those conditions, you know, I'm sure Louisiana gets pretty humid at times, all the way up into Ohio. So they have a pretty wide range and a pretty diverse habitat that they live in. So great question again.